Morning. Erin Jackson. I'm Assistant Vice President for Financial Strategic Initiatives and Chief of Staff in University Finance and Administration, and I'm pleased to be welcoming you to the Finance Town Hall this morning. Before we get started, I'd like to go through just a few housekeeping items as we do at each of our town halls. Please know that we are recording this webinar, and after this event, we will post it to our website, finance.rutgers.edu. All attendees, because this is a webinar, are on mute. And we will address your questions at the end of the meeting, but also take time throughout the presentation as time allows to answer questions. So please use the Q&A function throughout this presentation, and we'll pause for questions along the way, and again, address anything we don't get to at the end of the meeting. Anything we don't address or have time to address at this time, we will write up for you and post to our website. With those very brief housekeeping items, I'd like to invite the EVP CFO, Mike Gower, to join us.
Thank you, Erin. Good morning, everybody. It's good to have over 300 of you joining us for the Finance Town Hall, and that number is still growing. We have important topics to talk about today, and I'm looking forward to having you hear from my friends and colleagues from the cabinet. In a moment, I'll go over the agenda, but first I wanted to just highlight the guiding principles for University Finance Administration. I like to come back to these at each of these meetings and each of our internal staff meetings, just to remind ourselves, what's important to us. That is supporting and collaborating, supporting the mission in particular, understanding and trust between us. What are the best ways for us to work with one another, our alignment with the strategic needs of the university, and our accountability. These really come back to our support for the mission. I remind the staff from UFA each time we get together, we're here to support the mission of education, research, public service, and clinical care. Those are the things that are important to the university. And while we do not conduct the mission ourselves, we are supportive of it. We make sure that things can happen, and people get paid and bills get paid, and insurance gets taken care of, and stuff gets bought. It's all the little things that are important to making sure that the university meets its mission. Now let's turn to the agenda for today's town hall. This is a particularly good one. I'll take a few minutes just to give a CFO's perspective of things that are going on in the federal government. Then we will have two excellent guests. Mike Zwick from the Senior Vice President for Research, who oversees the Office for Research, and then Francine Newsome Pfeiffer, who is our Senior Vice President for Government Relations, giving an update from her perspective. And each of these individuals has been extraordinarily busy in the last 100 days as this new administration has changed things for us, changed the environment for higher education. So we will have some good thoughts and commentary from each of these guests, and then have an opportunity for you to ask questions of them, as Erin suggested. Again, we're going to do our best to answer those questions, as many of those as possible during the meeting. If we do not get to some of them, we will prepare answers in writing and post them. As an added reminder, after this webinar concludes, we'll be hosting Ask the Expert sessions, which will have separate Zoom links, and then we'll share those with you as we go along here. So now let's get started. Next. I know you know that I take time at the start of each town hall to discuss trends in higher education, and especially from my viewpoint. I like to be able to share frameworks and graphs and trends and different things that are published. For instance, Deloitte, the accounting and consulting firm, just posted, and I think we'll put a link in the chat, um, their annual 2025 higher education trends. But few trends could be as pertinent right now. There's the swift, impactful changes that are underway, seeming to remake the relationship between institutions of higher education and the federal government. Since early in this year, I have been convening a group of CFOs from the Big Ten plus institutions every Tuesday evening to discuss in real time how we're responding to these challenges. These challenges affect every one of our colleague universities. There is not a one of them that is not facing similar types of challenges that we are. They may be dealing with them in greater volume. They may be having other things that impact them that are more particular to the things that they do. But no institution has been, especially among our peer group, has been immune from these things. In fact, many of these other institutions are also challenged by different things going on within their state governments, where their state governments are aligned in many cases with what is going on in Washington. So that provides them an equal challenge to things that we have to deal with. But the ground is moving very quickly. And what's important is that we are watching things through our own institutional means, but also our memberships in various organizations. Just yesterday, I was on a call from the National Association of College and University Business Officers, and they've been running regular webinars in terms of what are things that pertain to particular issues as they relate to the operations and business functions of the universities. But also they have a strong focus on what's going on in regard to financial aid. And that's an area, for instance, that I'm particularly concerned about with the goings on with about the Department of Education. So we have a lot of fronts, I call them, a lot of different places that are having concern, whether it be what's going on in individual research projects, which are Mike will be speaking about, what's going on with programs in general, what is going on relative to impact of the large scale layoffs and firings in the federal government and the reorganization of certain areas. So we have to be vigilant to a lot of different trends and a lot of different issues at one time and be flexible and ready to pivot towards those. In addition to my partnering with Mike Zwick in the Office of Research and Francine Pfeiffer in Government Relations, we're strongly engaged with the Office of General Counsel. John Farmer, the interim General Counsel, has been at the forefront and working with other Big Ten institutions, other universities in litigations that have been going on, collaborating with the New Jersey Attorney General, and looking for ways to try to protect the mission of the university as we go forward. Again, it comes down to the mission of the university. We need to do what is necessary to protect the education mission, to do what we can do to support and protect the vital research that goes on from this university, the societal impact that research has. We don't wish to lose the real impact positive impact it can have on our New Jersey communities and the nation as a whole. In addition, we also need to keep an eye on what's going on in the clinical side of the world and the public service side. Those are not immune. from this. We have concerns about what might happen in the Medicaid space and how that relates to the clinical care that Rutgers Health is able to provide, for instance, through our clinical partners. So a lot of different things going on here. And what's really important is that we are looking at many different scenarios, many different eventualities, and trying to plan for those, trying to make sure that we can support the institution if we have, for instance, not getting payments on a regular time frame, not being able to push through the student financial aid on a regular basis as we had been in the past. We haven't hit that yet, but we're preparing in case we do. So looking at these scenarios with the cabinet and with the board is vital. And again, that's what is exactly going on with all my counterparts and other Big Ten institutions as we were talking with one another on Monday and Tuesday. So a lot of things going on there. I really am looking forward to this session because I think you will get a lot out of hearing from my colleagues here. I see now we're over 400 attendees, and welcome to those of you who've just joined us. So it's important to get on to the meat of the meeting. And so I'd next like to introduce Mike Zwick. Mike is the Senior Vice President for Research for the university. He leads the Office for Research. He himself is a renowned researcher and knows firsthand what is going on at the bench and how it relates to healthcare. Mike and the Office of Research have been hard at work to keep up with the changes that have been going on, individual grants and larger. They've been tirelessly coordinating with many units impacted to provide guidance and support during these uncertain times. I'm happy to have Mike here to discuss the current state, what we might expect down the road, as well as what his team is doing to help support principal investigators and other research components. So Mike, let me turn it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. And thank you for inviting me to speak. And thanks, everybody. Welcome. Good morning. Next slide. So I want to today give you an update from the Office for Research. Next slide. So I want to start with really addressing the elephant in the room. And, we're living through some remarkable times. And I think it's really important that we, as Mike Gower spoke to, that we reemphasize what we believe in our current circumstances. And so regardless of what's happening on the federal level, here are 5 points that I believe and I share with a variety of audiences where I speak. The first is that America's research prowess, led by our research universities, faculty, students, and staff, drives innovation. And it's American companies who turn our discoveries into goods and services that improve the lives of all Americans. A strong research and innovation enterprises is advancing American interests and is responsible for the life that we live and the world that we're going to leave our children and our grandchildren. Rutgers Research and Innovation supports our students, faculty, staff, and the people and communities of New Jersey. And I believe it's precisely the wrong time for our country to give up its commitment to research and innovation. We are facing fierce competition throughout the world, and we should be doubling down on research and innovation in support of our economy and our way of life. Next slide. So let me talk a little bit about the impact to research. And you obviously saw Mike's overview. You've been reading social media, reading the press. And I want to emphasize, as Mike said, our key mission at Rutgers is teaching, research, and service. And these are the 3 key missions of a research university. They're interdependent. And so I'm going to speak to the impacts on research, but recognize that the impacts on research also impact our teaching, they impact our students, they impact the service we're providing to the people of New Jersey in interdependent ways. And so what have we been dealing with? We've been dealing with overall funding priority changes by the federal government. There was early on in January, there was a proposed reduction of cost recovery which we and many other states successfully fought through legal action, and at least through the end of September are going to be okay, I think. We've been dealing with a lot of stop work orders and other federal notices due to changing priorities in the federal government. We've been dealing with delays of proposal reviews that many faculty are deeply concerned about because grants that have worthy scores, worthy of funding, are not have been delayed, and their funding has been delayed, and that's delaying our critical research and innovation. And then there's been ancillary cuts from other funding sources. The state's fiscal status is sort of challenging, and Francine Newsome Pfeiffer will speak to these in her remarks that are coming up. Next slide. So I want to dig into the numbers a little bit and share exactly what has been the impact, because I think the impact, while I think I would say I'd characterize the impact as modest to say. Now, for an individual faculty member, the impact is enormous. And so every one of these orders, we've been working directly with the Office of General Counsel and the PI to develop a recommendation, develop a plan, address the issues raised by the federal sponsors. So this actually shows the number of active federal notices that we're working with individual PIs right now. And so it's important that you recognize that every one of these is specific to a PI. There's been very few like blanket reductions in funding. So we've not been impacted like some of our peers that have had wholesale reductions of all federal funding. And we've been pretty successful in managing, and we finalized a lot of these. Only a couple have had a budget reduction. Most of them have been modifications to the text, and that really have not resulted in any financial changes. They've changed some wording, or there's been really, honestly, very little change. And in general, we have found that the program officers at the sponsors want to work with us to actually bring grants in compliance with current executive orders. But we have had some grants terminated. We've had 17 grants terminated, and we continue to work with every single PI. We are monitoring federal tracking at Rutgers EDU every single day. And, again, I just continue to emphasize that if you as a researcher, or if one of the researchers you're supporting get an email from a federal sponsor, they need to send it immediately to federal tracking at Rutgers EDU. Time is of the essence. We want to actually track all these, and we want to get in touch so that if there's appeal possibilities or there's other actions we can take, we can do so as quickly as possible. Next slide. So these are the grant terminations. And this is the distribution across chancellor-led unit, the total number of terminations that we've received to date. Now, some of these we're still working on. And this is actually, in some sense, the worst case scenario that we're dealing with. Some of our terminations are being reversed under a temporary restraining order. But I think it's worth presenting the worst case scenario. So this shows that we would have an estimated loss of around $17 million this year, $19 million in next year. Keep in mind, grants extend over multiple years. So when a grant is terminated, the financial impact is not realized just in the current fiscal year. There'll be impacts in multiple fiscal years or further on. And the total impact to this date is $36 million. A lot of money. Next slide. So what are we doing? As Mike spoke, we are working very hand in glove in the cabinet. I'm working very closely with Mike Gower, working very closely with the general counsel's office to challenge overall federal decisions. We're supporting efforts. We have been incredibly supported by the New Jersey Attorney General's office, and we've been writing amicus briefs. We've been writing declarations in support of lawsuits. We're providing information about the impact on our research enterprise directly to the Attorney General. So we've been fantastically supported. I think as all New Jersey residents, those of you, we're all New Jersey, most of us are New Jersey residents, and we should be pretty proud that our state government is really working in support of its public university. We are challenging stop work orders, so we have an evaluation process. We work with every PI individually. We're proceeding with administrative appeals, and we encourage administrative appeals. Now that puts work on the PI because these have to be scientifically based administrative appeals. And there's a process for doing that. We have sent off some of our first appeals for NIH grants. I don't know how successful they'll be. It's unclear how fast the NIH is going to turn these around. They are very vague. We're a little bit unclear if there's actually people at the NIH that are actually going to review, who's going to review these and how that process is going to work. But I think we have to avail ourselves of every possibility of appeal, and we will be supporting PIs to do so. We communicate clearly, obviously, university-wide notes, messages that Mike and I have sent out. We're communicating with the chancellor-led units, leadership, chief budget officers, research leads, the chancellors. We're meeting with faculty and staff like we are today to try to keep people informed. We are developing scenarios and forecasts to predict losses, and developing direction for bridge or gap funding that will provide guidance to local deans and the chancellors, should that be something that they wish to pursue with their faculty. We've also taken this opportunity to really innovate and explore how do we use our technology and data to make our research enterprise even more effective and to help faculty be in a better position to compete for future funding. So we've implemented a workflow actually since January where we can now use AI to understand who our experts are. So we have 4,600 grants in our grant portfolio that link to more than 10,000 Oracle projects. We can now use AI to ask questions about that, very detailed questions and very thoughtful questions. And this can be very useful because it can allow us to partner with the foundation to help match experts with donors. So other potential funding sources that are not the federal government, that could be industry or foundations or other opportunities for funding. It can help us to identify lines of research that could lead to new technologies in key disciplines. So maybe we can actually patent or license those. These are longer term strategies, but we can get better at leveraging all the amazing discoveries and ideas that are being developed here at Rutgers. And then we're also using AI to streamline our administrative processes so that we can become more efficient and so that we can actually provide the personal support that we need for particular problems for faculty so that I don't have people having to do sort of the monotonous routine stuff. If we can automate those steps, they can give better service directly to individual faculty and solve problems and support faculty. As I say, we are a member of every faculty member's team. And we're a critical member, and we want every faculty member to succeed. And so we take our role very seriously in the research and discovery and innovation processes. Next step, or next slide. So what are we doing? I think there's, when you look out, and Francine will really speak to this about future budget opportunities with the federal government and where the federal budget may be going, but we had to develop a better understanding of new federal funding priorities, other funding priorities. We have to determine how we maintain our values while we seek federal funding. And we need to communicate clearly about shifts in federal funding. And so we're working forward on that. We work closely with Louis Burke. In fact, this afternoon, there's a meeting with Louis Burke trying to get the latest intelligence coming out of Washington, D.C. And so we're continuing to work in this sort of research development space to really help our faculty position themselves, because I think, and I don't want to steal Francine's thunder, but it's pretty clear, I think we all recognize that federal funding is going to become more challenging to get. It's probably going to decline in fiscal year 26 and beyond. And so we need to make sure that our faculty are as competitive as possible to obtain and compete successfully for those funds. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about AI, because I think this is a really fantastic opportunity for innovation. And I think many of the lessons that we're learning here can be applied in other parts of the operation, both in UFA, outside UFA, in IP&O, there may be other within schools. Because one thing we have at Rutgers is we have lots of data. And one of the things that has sort of nagged at me is I know I had this big database of grants, but I never felt like we really used it as effectively as we could have. And so now this crisis has really forced us to quickly accelerate those sorts of developments. So now we can do things like data mining. We can try to find alternative funders or find experts, answer questions that people in the community might have, or companies might have, or people outside Rutgers have. It can be used to accelerate our invention discovery. One of the observations that's been long recognized is that women get fewer patents than men. Why is that? And my hypothesis has been we don't ask as many women investigators to actually file a patent. And so can we actually find people in our database that is a more inclusive way to actually explore our database, find those technologies, help prioritize, and actually generate more patent revenue and allow more people to have a patent or to have a startup company. And then our budget cuts, we have to become more efficient. The budget cuts have reduced our staff, at a time when the research enterprise has been undergoing really strong growth over the last 4 or 5 years. We're up over 40% in the last 5 years. And so we're trying to become more efficient. And so these are sort of our goals is, how do we look at lots of data? How do we ask really interesting questions? And how do we turn these into actionable outcomes? Next slide. And so we've had some real success in the data mining space in determining award disciplines, identifying awards with key information. We can now do this in the Office for Research. And so if there are questions that you have, you should partner with us and we can search the database and help you identify these sorts of questions. The invention discovery work is ongoing, and our process enhancement in terms of reviewing submissions, providing a checklist. A lot of these things that my team works really hard to do, but are kind of monotonous. If we can streamline and automate those, we're pursuing those sorts of projects right now. Next slide. And so what's next? I think, it's the importance of collaboration has never been higher. We all have to work together to understand the federal changes because our missions are interdependent. The changes in the federal government have many impacts on our teaching, research, and service, and they have impacts on finance. They have impacts on particular areas in research. They might have impacts on our buildings. That we have to actually work together and collaborate to understand how these changes are going to impact us. We got to address the immediate crisis, but we have to prepare ourselves for longer term challenges. We got to be prepared to compete more aggressively. We have to understand that there may be lines of research that are closing and there may be others that are opening, and we have to position our faculty and help them go into those doors that are opening. And we're really working hard to increase communication about Rutgers innovation. It's a great story. Since I arrived here 3.5 years ago, I don't think anyone in New Jersey actually really understood how big and how talented and what an important innovation and economic development engine the Office for Research and Office for Research is trying to tell that story. Rutgers faculty are doing really fantastic work, and we're really working to tell that story, to make it very personal and tell the individual stories and work with the chancellor-led unit communications teams to really amplify these stories in the broader ecosystem. Next slide. And I think I'm finishing up, and thank you, Mike, and I'll wait to the end to take any questions.
Well, let's stop a minute. So go back one slide, folks. Thank you. So let's see if we have a few questions, but let me ask you one, and just to reiterate, for the almost 450 people we have on here, go through what to do if the lab, if a PI gets a stop work order or some other kind of notice regarding their federal research.
Yeah, the key thing to do is immediately take that email that you received and send it to federal-tracking@rutgers.edu. That is the entryway into the workflow. That is a joint email address monitored by OGC, Office for Research, Government Relations, and that's how we start our process. So you need to do that. You need to do that immediately because some of the appeals have a time limit, and so we want to actually make sure that we give as much time as possible to faculty who want to file an appeal. We want to make sure that we have opportunities to review all the actions. Sometimes the actions for the stop work are actually just change a bit of language in an abstract, and we've been able to deal with those really quickly with program officers. So again, the key thing, federal-tracking@rutgers.edu.
And if it should go further and it actually be a cancellation, what should people be doing? How should they be engaging?
Yeah, so it's very important, and it's the guidance that we've provided. You need to keep as a faculty member, you need to keep your chair, your dean, the chancellor's office informed, and you should copy them on this email to federal tracking. If a grant is terminated and there's now a gap in funding, this has got to be worked locally. So you got to start with your chair, work with your dean, and develop a financial strategy, and ultimately then with the chancellor for how you're going to address this. One of the things is I think as faculty, we recognize that we often have gaps in funding. We may lose a grant, we gain a grant, and these are managed routinely locally. Now, the scale and scope and the anxiety that's being induced is higher than what happens to individual faculty during the normal course of research. but you've got to work with your dean, keep them engaged. And Mike and I are developing guidance to actually really make this very clear exactly how this will work, and to really reinforce this process. This is the standard way in which we manage bridge funding or gaps in funding, right? I mean, this is the under our financial system, expenses and revenue are managed locally by deans. And so deans are the first person you need to speak to. And obviously through your chair, that should there be a gap in funding, that's where faculty need to go. Does that answer the question, Mike?
You're muted, Mike.
Oh, thank you, Mike. Sorry. I can't go through the whole time without doing that at least once. Thanks for that. And Aaron, do we have other questions from the audience, please?
Yes, we do. So first one is Mike Z, you shared with us the data that your team's been working on. Are you planning on sharing access to this data, or have you shared this data that you have with other universities?
Right now, we've shared the data with the university leaders who, with the chancellors and members of the cabinet who have to make critical decisions. We haven't shared it publicly with other universities. That would be something we could think about doing.
Okay, thank you. I've got one more. Following up on this, what do we do if we get in this situation? When Rutgers is the subcontract and we receive a stop work order and we've already informed federal tracking, is there any additional recourse for us to appeal?
So when we're subcontract, we're really dependent upon what the primary decides to do. So we can subcontracts come through the Office for Research. We're glad, the prime ultimately has to decide to appeal. We can work with you to engage the prime and sort of express our interest in supporting an appeal, but it ultimately depends on what the prime wants to do. And anecdotally, we're seeing different universities handling subcontracts in different ways. Again, get in touch with your grant specialists and we'll work with you and manage through that situation. Every case is a little bit different.
Thanks, Mike. And actually, so following up on your point there that institutions are approaching this differently. First, thanks from this questionnaire for all your great work. And second, is your office, or do you know other units in Rutgers have developed, or are they planning to develop bridge funding for terminated grants? University of Michigan is an example of one institution that's chosen that route.
Yes, I am aware of the Michigan's model. So right now, the guidance that we're developing, puts the responsibility for bridge funding where the revenue and expenses lie in our financial model, which is at the decanal units, so with the deans. So it really depends on particular deans have to decide in the context of their school and their research enterprise how they do bridging, and they make these decisions every day in normal times. So they are the ones who actually have to make that decision. So that is the mechanism and the means by which faculty should approach that question, and that's going to vary by decanal unit across the university. I know in some places, the deans are doing this, and the chancellors are actually supporting it also. So it's important that both, you start with your deans, but then you can work in your chancellor-led unit's office to seek assistance with that particular question.
Thanks. And we've got one more for you right at this point. What should we do when we're not hearing back from the PO? So this is a case, obviously we don't have the specifics in the webinar, but
Right.
It's already been communicated to federal tracking, but the question is about what do we do if we're not hearing back for the PO?
Yeah, I'm not sure. My RSP team, I think you can reach out to my RSP team and we can try to assist you. I think given the scope and scale of the layoffs at the federal government, I think sometimes this happens and we're just not quite sure, and we can try to find alternate sources of contacts. we know that the federal layoffs are delaying responses from the POs also. So please reach out to us and we'll help you if you're not hearing from the POs.
And Mike, just for the benefit of anyone in the audience who's not familiar with those acronyms, is that the sponsored research program, ours?
Oh yeah,
Who is the
Diane
team?
Ambrose. Yeah, Diane Ambrose is the lead of that. So Diane Ambrose's team. Jose Roman is the vice president of research administration. You can reach out directly to Diane or Jose. But if you just send an email to federal tracking, that's probably the best way to get in the system. So even if you have a question saying, "Hey, I'm not hearing from my PO. It's been this many days," you can send it to federal tracking, and then we can then link it up to the work that we're already doing to support you, and we can try to get you an answer and see if there's ways that we can assist.
Thanks, Mike. Mike G, over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. Thank you, Mike, for joining us here, and stick around, please. We may have some more questions as we go along. It's a good time to bring in now our other cabinet friend and colleague, Francine Newsome Pfeiffer, someone who's been very, very busy advocating on our behalf. She and her team have been on the front lines, keeping our New Jersey delegation and others informed about the great work Rutgers does every day and the impact that these federal actions can have and threaten to have on our teaching, research, clinical, and public missions. Francine, welcome to the Finance Town Hall.
Hi, Mike, and thank you for having me. I do not have slides today, so you just get to hear me talk. I have found that given how quickly things change, both mostly at the federal level these days, that it's easier just to speak with you. So as Mike mentioned, we have been really busy in government relations. For those of you that may not be familiar with the work of the Office of Government Relations, we have offices in Trenton and in Washington, D.C., as well as an office on campus in Winans, and we work with point people in each of our chancellor-led units as well. So government relations in normal times is advocating on behalf of the university, and particularly those key investments at the state and federal level that allow so much of our work at the university to continue and allow our students to be able to afford their education. So we were prepared with the new administration when it came to expecting some chaos. I was in the federal relations office when the first Trump administration was in place, and got very used to abrupt decisions, challenging and sometimes conflicting information. But the breadth and scale of the chaos, disruption, delays, and now in some cases cancellations has been breathtaking this time around. And so it does have my team working overtime. One of the things I like to start with is, despite all of the chaos that we do have, I think it's really important to try the best you can to keep a calm hand on the wheel and to keep calm and carry on. There are a lot of people working really hard to keep things as smooth as possible despite the federal environment. And the other thing I like to point out is that Rutgers remains very committed to its values. And that is something that we certainly lead with in our storytelling when we're working with our members of Congress and their staff. That is somewhat easier to do because we're in the state of New Jersey, and the state leadership presently shares those values. And as Mike Gower and Mike Zwick mentioned, we have been working really closely with the state Attorney General's office, and he is working with other attorneys general across the country to address many of the issues that are coming up that affect higher education through the courts. And so that is the kind of partnership that makes it a little more manageable in this difficult environment. We are in the early days of this administration. We saw an injunction on an attempt to curb gender affirming care and federal funding to institutions that provided that care. More recently, there was a suit against cuts to public health funding through the states. Some of that work is done at Rutgers. So we were able to partner with the state of New Jersey in their effort, and an injunction has been put in place there as well. These are still just steps along the way. As Mike pointed out, when there are these court moves, we still have to wait to see kind of what happens on the ground. And so we're going to continue to pursue those legal remedies and work with the state attorney general's office anytime that it makes sense. So other issues where that has been the case, F&A, the facilities and administrative costs that support our research, obviously very important to our mission. When we talk about that issue in Washington, we talk about a cut to F&A as a cut to research. We simply couldn't do much of the research without the support that make all that wraparound support, the buildings, the utilities, the people that make our research possible. So far, that has resonated. There is a decent amount of bipartisan support on Capitol Hill for a more sensible approach to making sure facilities and administrative costs at universities are covered. And so in the continuing resolution that passed at the end of February, I can't even keep my week straight anymore. Passed recently, there was language that prohibited the administration from changing F&A abruptly as they tried to do with that 15% cap. So that will be in place through September 30. And then there are also efforts underway through our associations to look at, is there a different way we should be approaching F&A that might be easier to get some of our elected officials in particular on board with. It is frankly quite complicated. And so I think there is room for improvement in how F&A is calculated and provided to institutions, but it should certainly not be an abrupt one-size-fits-all approach to making cuts to F&A. So some good news there, at least for now. The other areas where we've been working, obviously cuts to federal student aid and research funding would be devastating to the university. We've focused so far in this conversation mostly on those more targeted cuts that have come related to executive orders. Sometimes those executive orders might be about DEI. It might be that it's simply a change in direction for this particular administration. So there have been lists of like words that have been circulating that might be guiding some of the federal actions on which grants should be amended or terminated. My office continues to stay on top of that, and there are also efforts to sue the government on how they are approaching that particular topic. New Jersey wasn't part of this particular lawsuit, but eight different states recently sued on the cuts to NIH funding generally. So a lot of this really is a question of how far the courts are willing to go to rein in the Trump administration. And that is a work in progress. So we will continue to monitor that. Now, Mike Zwick mentioned that I would talk about the general budget issues that we're looking at the federal level. We are almost more than halfway through FY25 at the federal level. The new fiscal year will start on October 1. What's important to know is that the continuing resolution that passed in Congress, it really only set very broad funding levels. It's up to each agency to develop a spending plan, and those are supposed to be developed by May 1st. I think what's important to know, if you are someone who traditionally seeks federal grant funding, that this summer and through September are likely to be a time of opportunity. I mean, obviously read those requests for proposals closely to make sure that you feel comfortable with what this particular administration might be proposing, but be ready. There are going to be grant opportunities this summer and fall as the agencies try to get their funding out the door before the end of the fiscal year, as they're required to do. So I wanted to just flag that as an issue, just because of the way we've had so many delays in Congress making decisions about the federal budget. We are in this, again, chaotic environment where there will be a rush at the end of the fiscal year to get funds out the door. We are also following closely conversations about budget reconciliation. I'm not going to get into all the details, but this is a process that allows Congress to pass major changes on tax and spending through a simple majority. So not having to get past that 60 vote threshold that is typically in place for the Senate. And so budget reconciliation in recent years has produced major pieces of legislation. Obamacare, for example, the Affordable Care Act, was passed through reconciliation, as was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in the first Trump administration. And so for the universities, certainly we looking for opportunities, but unfortunately in this particular environment where higher education has been really under scrutiny, I am concerned about possible cuts to things that are important to higher education, including student aid through a reconciliation process. Possible cuts to Medicaid have been highly touted, and it is hard to imagine how the Republicans can get a bill through Congress without making major cuts to programs like Medicaid, because so much of the federal spend, that is where so much of the federal spending is. They're having a hard time in Congress passing a budget that the House and Senate agree with. There was just a postponement again this week in the House on passing a Senate approved budget. Just the close margins for the Republicans in the House and Senate make it really difficult for them to reach agreement. If they do reach agreement, that is where you'll start to see the kind of wheeling and dealing on reconciliation, and universities will be, including my office in Washington and many of our colleagues on campus, will be engaged in advocacy to make sure that the needs for higher education are not ignored, and that we are not a source of savings, quote unquote, or pay for, as they say in Washington, for other things like tax cuts in the bill. So in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, just for your awareness, the endowment tax that is sometimes, you may sometimes hear about, that applies to the most well-endowed universities and no public universities at this point, that was passed through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. There were attempts to curb tuition remission or tax tuition remission to graduate students in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So we are aware of where they may go on Capitol Hill with the budget reconciliation, and we're ready to fight. We're also ready to advocate if there are areas of opportunity. So we'll stay tuned there. The new fiscal year will start on October 1, as I mentioned. Congress, with all this on their plate, I think it's safe to assume we'll be in a congressional continuing resolution again, which is typically roughly flat funding. And so, I would project a tight budget picture for research. We'll know soon what that maximum Pell Grant award is for the coming year. Again, the spend plans from the federal government need to come out. I'm hopeful that it'll be at least a flat maximum Pell Grant award, but again, waiting to see those details on that May 1st spend plan, since student aid is forward funded. Other things I just want to flag for you, like Rutgers is not doing this work alone. Our advocacy is with all of our associations in Washington. Mike mentioned NACUBO. They're really an important source of expertise and advocacy when it comes to tax issues in particular. But our AAU, APLU, American Council on Education are all extremely important to our advocacy efforts, so that we are not operating alone. For bills to get through Congress, it really requires a national strategy, and Rutgers Reach is primarily in New Jersey. I want to also just mention another topic that I know has been front of mind this week and in the news recently, and that is student visas. That's another area of a high level of concern and confusion. There are some unprecedented steps being taken by this administration. And I think some of the footage that people have seen of students being, particularly that tough student being approached in the street by officers who are in plain clothes and with their faces covered, pulling a student and then attempting, to deport them. I think that for us at Rutgers, what we're trying to do is make sure that the campus community is extremely informed, that there's a federal tracking, in addition to the federal tracking email, there is also rutgers.edu/federal-actions, and that is the website where FAQs and other information is posted. I really encourage you to keep an eye on that site. It directs the community to a lot of really important information, including information at Rutgers Global, where timely alerts are posted and where students who have concerns should go. It is true that about a dozen students at Rutgers have had their status revoked in the last week due to an effort by the administration to comb what is called SEVIS, the Student and Exchange Visitor Information System. And this is something that's happening all over the country. So rough reports are at least 1,000 students have been affected by this. And this to me feels like an AI effort to match people in the database with other records that the U.S. government may have access to make rather abrupt determinations about whether or not people should remain lawfully here. So this is a a moving target and one for absolutely of high concern for the university. We support all of our students, and to have students treated in this way is unacceptable. With that, I think I'll pivot quickly, Mike, to state budget, since you mentioned that was of interest. Unfortunately, I don't have better news on the state budget than I do about the federal budget, other than to say, so let me just top lines. The governor's budget came out at the end of February. There are unfortunately $2 billion in discretionary cuts. Public higher education is not immune to those cuts. And at Rutgers, the rough estimate, it's about $70 million in cuts. And that is a combination of operating support cuts, cuts to line items that support important programs and service delivery by Rutgers across the state, as well as some targeted cuts to student aid, including a reduction in the Garden State Guarantee Program and an elimination of summer tag. My office, my state government relations team, is working with partners all over the university to advocate aggressively for restorations. We're also obviously working with the other universities in the state to work to restore operating support funding. I think restoration is the name of the game. It will not be a year where we're going to see large funding increases out of Trenton. That is just the reality of the budget picture. But we are working aggressively to restore as much of the cuts that were proposed in the governor's budget as possible. Want to just say that word one more time, proposed. The governor proposes the budget, the legislature enacts the budget, and they're required to do that by June 30. So we will know in a few months what the precise funding picture looks like going forward. And with that, I'll pause.
Thank you, Francine. We're going to get to questions in a minute. Just a couple of observations. One is that we live in an environment with a lot of different fiscal years. What Francine just talked about regarding the state impacts our next fiscal year starting July 1. We often don't know the results of that until the very end of June, so we have to plan for contingencies there. The federal fiscal year ends on September 30th. The next one beginning October 1st. So we'll actually be partway through our fiscal year, one quarter through, before budget things may happen there. And that's where we have to watch things, because they can move around depending on what is going on with the House and the Senate. So it's complicated. As I said at the beginning, we have a lot of different fronts going on here, and we have to watch them throughout this. But we're very much focusing, as we focus on research, also focusing on financial aid, and that comes from both of those fronts, federal and state. Whereas we need to protect access for our students, and we need to understand what's going on so as to be able to help them just know what to do in these circumstances. And in particular, the unknown right now really deals with, as I say, who's left at home in that Department of Education who can actually process student loans or process student grants. And we actually have a cohort of students that will be starting in May from the medical school. And we'll be learning very soon, what kind of impact we have, but building contingencies around that. So let's move to questions. Aaron, do you have questions for either Francine or Mike at this point?
Yeah. I want to begin with one. I know Mike G will need to probably leave first due to other commitments. So I'll ask you a timely one. Is there concern that the University Senate's recent mutual defense compact and the demands being made of Rutgers administration by the faculty union will result in retaliatory measures by the Trump administration? I know there's more than one of you. You are a senator, but do you have a comment yet on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's an unknown. I just say up front, it's an unknown. It is not unusual for putting out positions, and I think that There's good faith behind those. It's very unknown to see what this administration will do. You know, when it is when public statements are out there. So I can't really guess, to be honest.
Thanks. The next one, I'm trying to get the ones that are financial first. But of course, you each have a role to play in answering these questions. First, there's one about our thoughts as far as we know them related to tuitions. They're concerned that the 25-26 tuition and fees will see a higher than average increase.
I hope not. And it's too early to know that, but we're certainly trying to avoid an unusual increase there by all means possible. But again, until we know really what kinds of impacts we may see, and in particular from the state in that regard, state support, it's impossible to be definitive about it. People, you know, get at us occasionally because we don't declare tuition in February or in April like some institutions do. And this is a really good example of why, because it may go down to June 29th or June 30th before we really understand what our funding position will be. And if the proposed cuts that were made by the governor were to come into effect, it would have a real fiscal impact. Now we're planning for some of that as best we can. But the last resort is to go to an unusual tuition fee level.
Thanks, Mike. This one will be for each of you. I'm combining questions. There was a direct question about whether there will be possible cuts to staffing based on the proposed budget cuts discussed, and more broadly, each of you as unit leaders, what strategic measures are being considered to mitigate the impact on workforce, in particular Rutgers research? So I'll look to Mike Z to begin, particularly with respect to hiring, retention, and long-term sustainability of the research enterprise.
Yeah, thanks. Listen, I think we're all under a lot of stress right now. I think we see that the economy is not heading in a very good direction. I know all the central units, for example, are managing a 4.5% budget cut right now, and so we are reducing our staff. I think the key, the key approach that I've pursued is, we have to become more productive. We have to become more operationally excellent as a university, and we have to seek ways to use technology to free people up to do work that is actually more helpful to the institution. We get stuck sometimes in having lots of people do monotonous work, and one of my strategies in the Office for Research has been, can we free up some of the monotonous work using technology, and then get the people on my team be able to do things that are really greater value add to the university, that can lead to increased revenue, increased research opportunities, and support faculty in that way. So that has been my strategy and focus as we continue to work through this. And I know my colleagues in the central administration are similarly dealing with challenging cuts to all of our teams, and we're constantly striving to figure out how do we become more efficient and effective to support our particular areas across all 4 chancellor-led units. I don't know if Mike Gower, you want to add anything beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, the budget impacts are very local. As Mike suggested, we in central units have, and this was planned in the fall, a budget tightening, and I'm personally doing that through repurposing open positions, looking for every opportunity to avoid impacting current employees. Look at every opportunity. That said, if particular programs do get eliminated because of funding, and there is not the opportunity, that in the local functions, as mentioned, going to the deans and within individual chancellor units are going to make the decisions relative to what has to happen with the budgets. We live in a time when to say that we can plan for a definitive budget starting July 1 is ludicrous. We can plan for one scenario, and then we need to understand what another scenario may look like, and another scenario, and be nimble and be able to hold to that. So I have advised university leaders, whether they be deans or directors or vice presidents or whomever, is to keep your flexibility. Only engage in essential hires at this point in time. Leave positions open as much as possible to have that flexibility, not to affect the existing workforce. Look at large-scale procurements that aren't covered by grants. Look at travel that's not covered by grants, and be judicious in those things. Keep flexibility as much as possible. That's the message to the university leadership.
Thank you. Okay, there's a question about, I'll switch things up. Back to this conversation about engaging with other institutions. There's a comment about how it seems the federal government's strategy is to divide and conquer, beginning with the Ivies, and then we'll see who's next. It will be us. Once again, a question related to this defense pact proposed by the Senate with other Big Ten schools. The question is that while it's difficult for us to really broadcast our contracts or make public everything that we're doing here at Rutgers, I'd like to hear more commentary about how where you see opportunities, let's say, to work with other institutions or to have some more strength in numbers.
I'm
Yeah,
happy.
Aaron, well,
Go ahead, Mike.
yeah, I'm just going to say, we are working very closely with our Big Ten senior research officers. I know Mike mentioned he's working with the CFOs. I know the general counsel's working very aggressively with other members of the Big Ten. But I think we have to recognize that even within the Big Ten, there are political differences among states, and there's not consensus. I also am working with SROs and on the phone calls with SROs from other major members of the AAU, other major research universities. I think it's really important to recognize the federal government is immensely powerful in this space. I think the basic question that if we band together, we can stop the federal government from taking actions, as opposed to the federal government is picking off one university at a time. I think the federal government can pick off every university all at once. I mean, I think it's well within their power. So that while I think working together and sharing information and exploring how we advocate for what we believe in and advocate for the importance of our research and teaching enterprise, and we tell stories of Rutgers students and we tell stories of Rutgers faculty, I think that is really important. And when we can do that with our partners, at some level, I'm not convinced that we can stop a federal government from taking actions that are well within their purview to take actions. And I think we just have to be thoughtful about that and be a little bit recognize that at some level, the way to deal with the federal government is for elections to be held. And I think, I'll kick this to you, Francine. I don't know your perspective, but that's sort of my thinking about this.
Yeah, I think the limits of the federal government are being tested by the courts, and we don't quite know yet, both what the final outcome of those court cases will be or how this particular administration will respond to them. And so I know that if anyone heard the Daily yesterday with the president of Princeton, that podcast, he has made it clear that he intends to legally challenge the effort to freeze their funding. That is his. If that's what it comes to, that's what he will plan to do. At this point, they don't have a Columbia list of demands or something in front of them at Princeton. But it is certainly the case that I think we're at 6 Ivies, and now Northwestern has received these blanket, kind of, we're going to freeze your funding or terminate your funding if and honestly, they're not all the same, and so I think it's easy kind of to lump them all together. But the administration behind the scenes is taking different approaches with institutions. The Princeton freeze was tied to the Doge efficiency executive order, even though in the press it's been reported as part of the anti-Semitism OCR investigations. And then in other cases, it does appear to be an extension or tied to the OCR investigations. They're not all the same. And the way the federal government can come at an institution, I mean, we're already seeing a variety of different approaches. I think there are reviews at the UC system and at Stanford on their admissions practices related to the DEI executive order and the Students for Fair Admissions Supreme Court case. So really kind of seeing a variety of different approaches. I liken this to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what will stick. So to Mike's point, like it's impossible to kind of band together and be prepared to fight every single one of these things. And the local politics and the local context really does matter for each of these institutions. As I had mentioned earlier, in New Jersey, we have a government that shares our values and is ready to fight on our behalf in many cases. And so that it's very different for us than it is in Ohio, where they have banned DEI at the state level, or in Iowa, where that was already the case a couple of years ago. So that would be how I think it really depends is the answer to the question. It depends on what the issue is, whether or not we can band together and actually address these issues collectively. I do think we all have work to do in this space, and I mean that to every single person on this town hall today. Public trust in higher education is at an all-time low, and anything you can do to help restore that trust as members of the Rutgers community, talking about the value of your work and what it means to society, I think that's something we can all do. I think it has become an us versus them and have not type of story. And the truth is, the work at Rutgers is beneficial to the world, to the country, and to the state of New Jersey. And even if you have no plans to attend a university, your life is being touched in a positive way by the workforce development, innovation, economic development contributions of universities like Rutgers.
Yeah, and in fact, I want to even add that two things. The Attorney General has been a fantastic partner. I mean, I do think our strongest strategy is to align behind the Attorney General and fellow states. They've been fantastic, and I think John Farmer can speak to that. They've been enormously helpful in addressing government policy. I'd say the other thing is, Francine's exactly right. We have to tell the story of research, and I want to give one example. So Jim Simon's work in the School of Environmental and Biological Sciences, which has been captured in this amazing film, Fields of Devotion by Dana Siddell, is something I gave to the AAU. And the AAU is now going to use that as one of their examples of telling the story, because not only is it a great scientific story and it tells great work by students and SEBS and by Jim's work, but it talks about how I mean, the movie, if you've seen it, starts out with, and I think you can see it online on YouTube. It shows the interaction of a New Jersey farmer, and how their basil crop was saved because of Jim's work. And I feel like we need more stories like that. And those are the types of things that really personalize research and innovation. Because if it's the monolithic university, people think AU has done polling that people think we're a for-profit entity, and they think we're a big business. And I think we're not. And so telling the story about the incredible contributions, the transformative educational experiences that students have had, the transformational research, I think those are the stories that we have to really emphasize and personalize this. And all of us need to sort of do that to speak in the current political situation. I think that's our best strategy.
Thank you, Mike and Francine. I'm going to keep going with questions, although I sort of want to end there. So Francine, you had mentioned, and so did you, Mike, that part of the challenge we're facing is that each institution is facing different things, but also even within an institution, we might receive an executive order, an EO about one thing, and see a response related to that that's separate. there's several comments and questions about the students, the Rutgers students whose visas were revoked. That people would love to know more about that. Were the students part of the protest? Do we know why their visas were revoked? So anything you could share on that, as there are several questions related to looking for more information.
Yeah, and maybe the language isn't quite that their visa was revoked, but their status was revoked. It's their record in CVIS, the system, was revoked, which is essentially turns them into undocumented individuals. They're here illegally in the eyes of the government. No, we don't. It's a very vague reasoning for all of the cases. Anecdotally, it appears that if you've had some interaction with the police or some little mark on your record with regard to ICE, that's why. But I don't want to speak to individual cases. It does. It feels like this is operating completely outside of due process, and it definitely feels like something that should be stopped because there is no. It's just being done so abruptly, and the students are not being notified by the government directly. We are the ones finding out at Rutgers because of the interface our global affairs office has with this system. We are not aware of any cases where the students have been involved in protests, so that does not seem to be the case here. But that's just a kind of a broad comment. It is certainly the case. The Department of Homeland Security noted yesterday that they will be using AI to comb social media to look for information about students participating in protests. So this is understandably extremely scary and anxiety producing for our international student community.
And to your knowledge, at this point, has Rutgers been forced to, as a requirement of continued federal funding?
We are not providing the yeah, no, and we follow the immigrant trust directive from the state of New Jersey, which is something that the Attorney General issued during the first Trump administration and remains in place. So I'm certainly welcome to take a look at that. If you are interacting with an international student who is concerned, the most important thing to do is encourage them to contact Rutgers Global and seek individual support and advice. There are resources available for students, and in the, I know there have been false reports of ICE on campus. If you do encounter ICE on campus, call the Rutgers Police Department. Don't try to put yourself in between ICE and wherever they're trying to go. To simply say, I'm alerting the Rutgers Police. And if they try to come into a building that you're in, you can simply say, would you mind staying here while I alert Rutgers Police? I mean, that is the best advice I can give you about these circumstances. There are no confirmed cases of ICE being on campus. I just want to dispel that rumor.
Thank you. I got one more on the political side of things, and then I'd like to turn us back to some things about our units and research. But for you, Francine, with the Trump administration potentially looking to shift to more state level model of administering higher education funding, is Rutgers lobbying at this point for any particular governor candidate with a strong record of supporting higher education initiatives? Or how do you approach the unique period of time we are in our state?
Yes. Well, there is a policy, if you don't know, on electoral politics on campus resources. We are not permitted as a public university, and frankly, no university as nonprofit universities are able to be involved in electoral politics. So we do not support any particular candidates. We remain totally outside of that process. But on the question of the states, the funding being shifted to the states. So I've heard this report that people think student aid is going to be administered in some kind of block grant to the states. I don't see that happening. I just want to kind of point that out. Right now, the current plan seems to be that the Small Business Administration will manage the student loan program. We'll have to see on that. Our major test of how student aid is functioning in light of the hollowing out and proposed elimination of the Department of Ed will occur as we approach the fall semester. So I just want to flag that issue. But when it comes to gubernatorial candidates, you are all as individuals welcome to engage in that process. I encourage you to vote. It's important, but the university does not engage in that process, and no university resources should be used to support any particular candidate.
Thank you. So here's another fun hot topic and maybe I'll ask Mike to weigh in first on this one. Get ready. I didn't ask it, but it is an important one. And that is there a fringe proposal for FY26, and what can you share with us about where we are with that?
Yes, so we have a fringe proposal for fiscal year 26. It's been submitted to the federal government. The proposal is to have a single fringe rate for sponsored awards, irrespective of funding source, whether they're federal, foundation, state, and then there's a separate fringe rate for full-time staff. There's a whole bunch of categories. It's very complicated. The bottom line is we're waiting on the federal government to approve this. And unfortunately, the federal government laid off the entire office of people that we negotiate our F&A rates and the people who approve our fringe rate. So we are working to figure out who in the federal government and HHS will actually approve this. More to come. And we're working aggressively to try to get that done. And I know Francine is helping us through our means to try to figure out who exactly is doing this in the government now, since the people we usually work with are now on administrative leave, I believe.
Yes, that's right, Mike. And that question, unfortunately, who is exactly doing this in the government is one that pops up in a lot of spaces. You addressed a question earlier about someone not getting a response from the program officer, and Mike's team in sponsored research also is in touch with my DC team. There are avenues we can explore. When a brick wall is hit, there are different ways we can try to see if we can scale it or work around it, and that includes working with the consultants we have at Lewis Burke Associates, who really they're very well staffed to be very informed about all the different directions at the different research agencies, and in some limited cases we might even engage an elected official or their staff to try and help us get an answer that is otherwise escaping us.
Oops. I think you're muted, Aaron.
You're not.
Yeah.
Oh, you're back.
Okay. The wonders of Zoom today. So there's a question here about the possibility of travel, conferences, and meetings that are charged to start up or discretionary funds, and whether or not they'll be frozen. Now, I know there's some variation across all of our units, but maybe Mike Z, I'd ask you to provide any insight you have on this.
Well, listen, anything's possible. And I think Mike Gower spoke to, as leaders, we all have to practice fiscal responsibility in our organizations. But as of right now, there's been no discussion in the cabinet. There's no policy in place about any sort of freeze across the university. So it's being managed locally. And all of us as leaders who have budgets are pursuing. We know the future. There are potential challenges, and we have to be very cautious with our financial resources. So as I think Mike Gower said, prepare yourself to be flexible, so that you have flexibility going forward. So that's what I would offer as an answer to that question.
Thank you. As we think about the grants that have been canceled, sticking on this thread, this questioner talks about the fact that the academic units are already financially taxed, so they're paying in to cover some of the the cost pool. But what can you share about support beyond what you've already described, if there's been a plan for that? So you've told us about going to your chair and then to your dean and on, but broadly at the university, what can you share about support to cover these costs?
Yeah, well, I'm speaking to financial experts who know this, who know these data better than me. But I mean, I think in a broad sense, 85% of our revenue goes to local units, 15% stays centrally. And so, it used to be in the past, long before I got here, I think before Mike Gower got here, that the central administrative units used to actually get much more, they used to get the bulk of the funding. They would get the FNA, they would get other sorts of funding, and it would be held centrally, and then it would be spread out to local units. Our current model is not like that. The current model is 85% of revenue goes to local units, and the central units receive RCM really for operations. So I think I am not, there is not a central funding plan for this, because this has to be done locally, because that's where the money is located. Now, what it's going to mean is that local units are probably going to have to make very difficult decisions, unfortunately. And that's going to be challenging, but the local units are the experts in their particular area, and those decisions may vary across the university. But I think if there's less money, we have to make hard decisions sometimes. And I think that's, we're working on developing guidance around that to make sure that we can support the deans, support the chancellors as they make those decisions. But that's the reality of our model and our approach.
Now I'm gonna turn us back to something Francine said earlier before we close up today's meeting. There's a question here that actually is about what each of us can do as individuals to advocate for higher education in Rutgers. So Francine, I'd invite you first if you have anything more to say, and then Mike, I'd look to you to ask the same question. How can we as individuals advocate for the importance of research? But Francine, you first.
Sure. Well, I'm going to say what I said before, which is vote and be an informed constituent. So there is a gubernatorial election. The primary is in early June. Do your homework about the candidates, and that, it's really important to Rutgers. A large source of our support comes from the state. And the governor really sets the tone on the budget, as you heard me describe. So that's the first thing I would say. I would also say be an engaged citizen when it comes to, talking to your, not just elected officials, but your neighbors. Be an advocate for higher education in the way you do your work. And it's okay to go ahead and contact your congressperson. If you have something, if you don't like what you're seeing, let them know. That does work. I think you're going to see some town hall opportunities probably during the congressional recess. Certainly in August, I suspect that'll be a really busy time. So if you are concerned about what you're seeing, show up and have your voice heard. I mean, it's really important. And I think we should all be working on what our elevator pitch is when it comes to the value of higher education and the role that Rutgers plays in making the world a better place or making the community a better place. So I think that's some homework I would leave you with.
Yeah, I mean, Francine is the political expert, and I think everything she says, I completely agree with. I'll just give my personal view. Is I think you really have to, as I said at the beginning of my talk, you have to figure out what you believe in, and I have to say, as a former naval officer who had 25 years service, I'm a former commander, I'm a Desert Storm vet and Iraq War vet. I believe in the Constitution, and I believe in the right to vote, and I know I have voted in every election I can since I've turned 18. And I think every American should vote in every election. I think this is one of our most important rights. And so I encourage everyone to exercise that right. And I think it supports our Constitution, supports our country. And we all have to participate in democracy and in our republic for it to work well. So I encourage broad participation, and I was thrilled to serve this country, to support and give everybody the freedom to actually participate in that, in our form of government.
Thank you. I want to thank you both for being here on Mike Gower's behalf and on behalf of the whole University Finance and Administration team. On the next slide, we have your email addresses, but of course, I would also invite people on this call to go to these websites, go to the Office of Federal Relations website and visit the Office for Research's website, where you will find actually additional FAQs specific to this issue on top of what's on the Federal Action site. This afternoon and for the rest of the day, we will have Ask the Experts sessions. I am managing all things, but will very shortly put in the chat the link to those Ask the Expert sessions. So you should soon see a PDF for that. And I would also invite feedback. We do take feedback seriously, so please, if you have time, complete the survey I've also dropped in the chat. We will email it to you as well. And with that, I want to say thanks again to our panelists, and to all of you. Have a great rest of the day.